We are back with Season 5, Episode 22, What About Discord? This is an episode that was written by Neil Dusidau, who you may not have not heard of, that's fine. He's only ever worked on one other episode. Princess Spike. So, let's pull it back up to the top, shall we? 3 uninterrupted days of sorting books. Now, okay. I'm a geek. In fact, I'm a bit of an organization geek, since I like to be organized because one day I hope to rule the planet. So as a consequence, I do like to keep things nice and organized. Now, I'd point that out, though, because not everyone's into organization. There are some people, I've actually met spreadsheet geeks in my life, no joke. But just to mention how much I'm kind of with Twilight on this one, one of the things I plan to do today, while I wait for the laundry to finish, is sort my playlists. Because I'm on a new computer, so all the music has to be reorganized, reshuffled. And it's worth noting, I actually want to do this. Like, I'm looking forward to it. And once it's done, I'll be able to update it onto my phone and get my modern, up-to-date, sorted playlists on my phone, as well as on the computer. What? Anyways. So I'm with that. I am. It also goes back to something I've talked about before. There's geeks for just about anything, right? And as I've talked about before, spreadsheet geeks, there's a lot. There's all kinds of interests, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's just kind of cool. It's one of the better parts of the episode, and that says a lot. So the episode immediately starts to lose me after that. Because I've met geeks that are over the top about several things, but I agree there are over-the-top sports geeks. Funnily enough, I would also consider myself a sports geek. About specific sports, football being a big one. I actually really like football. Basketball. And, of course, racing, Formula 1 being the big one. But yeah, so inside jokes. Here's the deal. Inside jokes can be absolutely hysterical. They can. And proper utilization is really, in my opinion, what matters for that one. Magic Johnson, one of the best basketball players ever, as Ross. Lakers. Old Lakers, obviously, not new Lakers. But yeah, there's a... I hate to talk about the formulas and science of humor, but there is actual formulas and science when it comes to humor. I've discussed this before in my ruminations. In fact, coming up next year, I think we have at least one, I forget what the movie is right now, but one of the upcoming ruminations is on a comedy film. And I spend most of that rumination discussing the comedy of it. I've already done this, too. What movie was that? Hang on, looking at the list here. Oh, maybe it wasn't. I mean, I do talk about it during Princess Bride. It might have been one that already happened, because Spaceballs has already gone live, I think. I swear there was another one where I go even more in-depth into the structure of humor. You know what? I think it wasn't a movie. I'm thinking of TOS, because TOS has like 5 or so comedy episodes, and I discussed them while we're going through those. I think it's actually the TOS stuff, my bad. Anyways. There is a science to humor. There is. Obviously, tastes vary and preferences vary, but it's the same way that there is a science to cooking, right? There are certain types of combinations of flavors that are going to work better with each other under the right circumstances than with others, and so forth and so on. So, having said all that, when it comes to humor, inside joke humor tends to sit on a gradient, and there's actually a lot of different variables, a lot of different axes to keep track of. But the biggest and most important one is, no, TOS, not TNG. The biggest and most important one is familiarity. Okay? Now, if I say, you know, sand joke from episode 1, or excuse me, episode 2, excuse me, most people will get that, and that's fine. And I can just slide that in there. But if I just say the sand joke, well, that's not funny. That's another axis we'll talk about in a second. And if I mention that, well, that's not all that funny because everyone gets that. The more esoteric, the more ill-referenced it is, the more likely it is to be amusing. I actually do this on purpose in my ruminations. I'm not even sure how many of you have noticed this. I will go out of my way in ruminations to make a reference, referential humor, inside joke humor, regularly during my ruminations. And I will never explain myself, and I'll just slide it in there. And I'll always say it in a distant way. I won't say sand. I will say, well, of course I don't have an example off the top of it, but I'll say something that references the sand joke, right? I will say something that's like, yeah, I wouldn't be giving any speeches to a current beloved one about something that I'm not really fond of in comparison to her, or something like that. That's terrible and off the top of my head, but you get the idea. And I do that very frequently. And I do that on purpose, because you either don't get it at all, which is fine, or you do get it, and it is funnier by virtue of the fact that it is ill-referenced, rather than saying it outright, and that it is something that, you know, you yourself get. Right? There's a degree of formula to this. The other axis, which I just referenced, is utilization. How well you utilize it in new context. You know, anyone can make this. Let's use the sand joke again, and I try not to do it. There's also overexposure. That's the third axis. We're building up to that one. The second axis here, though, is utilization. You have to use it in a way that's clever, a way that makes sense. The cleverer, the better. The more you have to think about it, the more creative you utilize a reference, the funnier it's going to be. We've seen this just with memes in the last 20 years, right? Just a straight-up meme can be far more enjoyable and far more worth sharing than just a quick, huh, than it otherwise would be if there's like several hoops you have to mentally jump through in order to figure out what you're looking at and how it's being applied, right? So utilization is important. Now, in this episode, they do use decent utilization with some of the applications. And then for the most part, it's just saying it again. Right? Like just repeating the joke. So you'll notice how they've broken two of the axes so far. That leads me to the third axis, repetition. I actually go out of my way to try not to reuse specific references and inside joke humor as often as I can. The sand one I just mentioned, I have made one reference to that. Yes, I keep track of this. Shut up. I'm a geek. It's my job. I have made one reference to the sand thing recently. And you don't want to over-pull the joke. You don't want to over-smash that button. Because each time it's going to get a little less funny without gap. I know, okay, let me think about it. Let me explain this way. Picture the humor value as a bar, okay? Now, every time you pull the joke, it uses some of the fuel in this bar to produce humor. Which means there's less fuel in the bar, right? However, this bar refills over time. Again, I swear, I'm not making any of this up. This is actual science of humor stuff. Because if you... Now, that's a separate thing, Raskor. So you make the joke, and then you make the joke, and then you make the joke, and the tank's generally empty after the third thing. The third rule, the third repetition rule exists for a reason. The tank is usually empty after the third reference. If you hit it again, it's just gonna... It's down here. It's not funny. There's nothing left in the tank. However, if you wait a while... and don't make that reference for a while, the tank is refilled a bit. Oh, you got me again. You see the logic here? And so this is the worst metaphor I've ever made, or analogy, or whatever. But this is how you should do this kind of referential humor. This is why I try very hard not to make the same jokes over and over. And why I just kind of, you know, mention something. And then make a mental note not to mention it for a while, right? So this, I don't always succeed at that, by the way. I'll go ahead and admit that, because I'm an idiot. But, you know, whatever. Point is, the intent is to do that. If you're paying attention, they violate the third rule here, too. So the third axis. So, I'm trying to explain why this episode is aggressively unfunny to me. And that's important because it is deliberately dragging down my enjoyment of the episode substantially. So, on three separate axes, it fails at humor. Moving on. hang on. There's actually another thing, but let's save that for last, because it's right at the end. Anyways, so... then we have the Spike... The Spike Crush shows up out of absolutely nowhere. So let's go ahead and jot that one down. I'll admit, I had no memory of that. It just kind of slipped in there, if you're paying attention. So there's another Spike Crush. It wasn't overt. It's just... I'm already like about the episode, so I'll give you that though. The Spike Crush was decent. Spike Crush was decent. Discord is obviously up to something the entire episode. By the way, I have very few notes on this episode because there's not a lot to talk about here, other than what I had just have. Discord is obviously up to something. He has his comment with Rainbow. He has his sinister laughter. There's his approach and rarities, where he's constantly doing little side things. The episode makes it clear that he's up to something, which I only point out because they are trying to build up to that. Bob Ross is still amazing. You get points on that one episode. Twilight is upset at having missed it. And they mention this relatively early on. I point this out because this is the closest thing to a point the episode has, and I think it fails miserably at it. But she does mention, I'm not glum, I'm glad. And there's this bit where she's talking with Spike, and she says, and I quote, I wrote it down, Spike, I'm the princess of friendship. I don't get jealous. Weren't we just talking about that? Just last episode about how it flip-flops between who has the brain there. So Spike has the brain this episode. Anyways, so, you know, I gotta say, I'm sorry, I gotta interrupt. That, yeah, they never try to explain the inside jokes, too. Although, there's an interesting thing. There's an old saying, you never explain the joke. That's actually not true. That has to do with the first axis I already talked about with regards to inside references. In other words, reference it as an aside rather than directly. You know, that whole thing. That's what that's referring to. There's nothing wrong with explaining a joke. And indeed, explaining a joke can, emphasis, make it much funnier. I have actually had several circumstances where I had to explain the joke. It's also worth noting that explaining a joke, as weird as this may sound, is an art in and of itself. Because what you're effectively doing is you're telling the joke just in a more structural format, rather than sharing the joke. So if you present it properly, if you structurally present this joke and its explanation properly, then it can indeed still be funny. So, anyways. So, yeah, you don't just say sand. Yeah, exactly. You just... Okay, so listen. Let's explain this. And then you go through the steps and you explain how this lines up, and that's why the sand line is so emphasis, because he's trying to explain to this woman who he supposedly loves that he just met for the first time in 10 years, that he's so adorable because of how much he hates sand, unlike her. And he's trying to show it in contrast because he has no idea what he's doing and he's a stupid teenager. And then they're like, oh! Anyways. That bowl of rubies looks delicious. Is that just me? Like, really, I just... So... this is when they're like, okay, we need to go back and figure this out. And, look, I am a dragon, as several of my viewers have accused me of before. It did look like candy, and I love gemstones, especially sleeping on them. But anyways. So, we need to figure out time travel? Back to the Future reference. Of course, Twilight is anti-time travel. Now, if you guys don't mind, I want to read out my notes word for word to you, okay? So what my notes say are you suggesting Pinky McFly? Of course, Twilight is the anti-time travel. Wait, what? Is that Starlight in the friggin' bushes? That's exactly what I've written in my notes, word for word. I'd never seen that before. And I was in the middle of typing it while I was looking at the episode, and I was just, wait, pause, rewind. It is her! There you go. Time travel. It all lines up. Anyways. You know, Discord's kind of like a walking holodeck here. In the bits where he's explaining and recreating the scene, right? He turns the thing red and he adjusts the clouds and all that stuff. He would make a great GM for a D&D game. Anyways, So they start reciting this, and in my opinion, this is actually the best part of the episode. Because there's two scenes back-to-back which are actually decently well-constructed. The first scene that's well-constructed is them vaguely kind of generically going off of their super vague memories of what happened, which is presented very well. It's legitimately a good scene. And they're all like, "Oh, this? It was a snake. It was a stick. That was a steak. That was a stick." And it's like a one-off, right? They bounce off each other. Good stuff. Then, in total contrast to this, and this is why I say it's structurally good, rather than the super vague recollections of people who have no idea what they're talking about, they go through and meticulously recreate everything and present that as the humor. No, I think it was no, it was contrasting the font of the thing. Wait, I think the soup is just a little bit too cold. Hang on, let's warm this up a little bit, which is also well presented, and again, in contrast, and I don't know, I thought it was pretty funny. This, of course, leads to her line. "It's really important we figure this out. It's for the good of all of Equestria." What the hell? Yes, Equestria depends on her getting inside jokes. Science of friendship? I don't know. Truthful answer. Never looked into it. Yeah, Twilight's brain is just looping over those hoops, trying to make this all make sense. And Discord's loving deflating her here, of course, which we'll get back to that. Discord, actually, amusingly enough, is just trying to rub in the fact that she wasn't there. Yeah, Spike is probably the best part of the episode. And that's sad in a Discord episode. But what's interesting is he brings up, I think it's called observer effect, aka you cannot observe without affecting the observed. I don't think he meant to, but it's interesting that he goes that route. Anyways, so this then leads to her flat out refusing to accept this and having more ruby candy. And why do you think things are weird? I mean, there's got to be some kind of horrible spell or mystery. Why do you think that? Well, because they're having fun with Discord, that's why. Oh. Then, it's not that funny. I know funny. So then, you know, she gets the booze, or whatever, the potion, which may or may not have been a placebo all along, who knows, from Zecora. Because Zecora's clearly in on this, too. She's just like, uh-huh. And yeah, we finally know why that cauldron's there. I like to think so, too. After all, Pinky rather liked it. I know, funny. And then she goes and she's like, "Hey, you guys are all mind-controlled." And Rarity's, like, polite and just simping a sign. Everyone's just like, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, what I love is that Fluttershy is the one who's actually angry. Actually, Fluttershy and Rainbow. Fluttershy is angry on behalf of Discord. How dare you accuse him of doing that? Rainbow's unhappy because, on their behalf, how dare you accuse us of not being good enough to do that? Both of them have a pretty valid point, if I'm being blunt, and both of them have every reason to be upset. This then leads to, you know, a line, and I want to draw your attention to this. He does the peanut jarking, and Pinky says, "It's still funny." Remember that. So then, she loses it. Actually starts crying just a little bit. I wasn't there. I wasn't included. I'll give you this point, episode. The actual core point of the episode is not invalid. You know, the fact that she felt jealous and didn't like the feeling that she was jealous. Okay, I'll give you that. That's not bad. It makes perfect sense. It lines up. It even makes perfect sense since Discord himself has already gone through that exact same arc, and thus there's a degree of reasonability for why he would be the one to try and impress this upon her. However, he also states flat out that that is not something that, you know, that it was not his intention. Sorry, I clearing out my message thing here, and I just saw a picture, and it's Anyways. It's at Nintendo World. There's a painting of a bomb. And it's like, day 1, painting of a bomb. Day 2, and there's a thing to prevent people from jumping into the painting. Referential humor. So, Discord admits he did this on purpose. And this is pretty much where the episode falls apart drastically for me. Because he does have a point. As I just mentioned, he went through this with the Schmooze episode. And he is doing what I would usually consider to be my personal favorite interpretation of Q. I am here to help you, but I'm going to do so in a manner that amuses me. The problem is, he himself then admits he didn't really do this on purpose, and that it was just an amusing benefit. And then the episode nosedives, because the next thing he does is he makes another one of his inside references. Now, we talked about the repetition thing, right? So you might say, well, yeah, it stopped being funny. To which I remind you that literally less than a minute ago, Pinkie Pie and the entire group were laughing at his inside jokes. And she flat out said, it's still funny. So repetition isn't the issue anymore. It's just they have decided it has stopped being funny, even though, let's be frank, it stopped being funny about 20 minutes ago. Remember what I mentioned about the tank thing? And how it failed on that front? Then they segue into some of the most awkward dialogue I've seen in this show ever. Where they're like, yeah, you'd have to be under some kind of spell. Remember how I mentioned the bit where you have to implement it properly, right? That was the second axis of how to do referential humor. You have to implement that humor properly. And what they do is they implement it terribly. Out of universe perspective. Like they're just completely awkwardly trying to shove references into their dialogue in a non well-utilized way, in a very awkward and unnatural way, and it doesn't work. And then they laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh for, I think it was about 20 seconds solid, at these terrible, not funny inside references that are being badly utilized. And the whole time, he's so crushed by it. No, God, I don't get it. I feel left out. What's going on? Which makes no sense, since A, he already knows that reference, and B, he's already learned this lesson. In fact, he just mentioned this lesson to her. And then, nah, it's okay, we'll all laugh together. Bad ending. Cut off. What? Yeah, how do you make Discord not fun? How do you do that? Alarak was funner than this. Funner, not more interesting. And Alarak is a mass-murdering psychopath who is basically a Sith Lord. So I get the core theme. I do. I get the Aesop, right? It's okay to be jealous, because that's the Aesop. It's okay to be jealous. Good, decent core message, but I'm not going to give it credit for that, personally, because it is so badly implemented that I don't think it even gets across that message. I don't. I think that is the problem. In addition to being aggressively unfunny, in addition to being actively out of character for several people, in addition to being awkward and weirdly presented by someone who has seen humor through a looking glass. Yeah, the execution is just, what? I want to very strongly argue that this is a blue episode for me. I actively dislike this episode, and that's a damn shame, because I remember it badly, but usually when I remember something badly, it's like, nah, that's okay, it's better than I thought it was, and that's happened in this very show. But yeah, when I look at... We don't have that many blue episodes. I'm looking at... We have Spike at your service, Over a Barrel, Some Pony to Watch Over Me, and that's it. Princess Spike is like a deep blue. That was another step down. I don't think this is Lamentation worthy. Lamentation requires that little extra oomph, just like Purple does. But I want to argue that this is a blue. Because, ugh. We intend to use black if we ever get to the point of lamentation. But we actually haven't had one yet. We haven't had a true lamentation yet. We argued it for like 10 minutes about Princess Spike, which is the only episode that's been in consideration for lamentation. But ultimately, that was a one-off, to use my TOS terminology that you guys haven't heard yet. Lamentation, 1 off, 2 off, 3 off. For reference, this would be a 2 off by my own system. So, 2 steps above lamentation status. Nah, I'm just gonna give it blue. Screw it. I'm sorry. Wow. This is an episode I will never watch again. What shade of blue was I using? Okay. It's that one. There we go. No, that's still not it. What shade of blue is that? Whatever. Next week, sorry. So yeah, what do we got next week? Where's our episode list? So next week we're going to be covering 23 and 24. So 23 is the Hook Fields. Gotta say it right. Which we'll see what we think of that one when we get there. I don't have many expectations. Main Attraction, I have like no memories of. I think that's the one I'll tell a story about how I accidentally didn't watch it when I was first going through these. Yes, Lord Harrimont, because that would get rid of some of the character assassination. But it would still be just kind of, you know, like the other problems are still there. Yeah, rah-rah. So yeah, so I think I've seen this episode before. I might not have. No, I haven't. I haven't seen Main Attraction before. I'll talk about it next week. We'll get there. We'll get there. So we'll talk about those two then. Yeah, I know, it's because Netflix does things in release order rather than production order. Dang, we're gonna start the new year with the end of Season 5. I was kind of hoping we get it next week, but whatever. So yeah, next week, those two, and then January, in 2021, the Cutie Remark. That should be fun. As a reminder... Oh, hang on, let me chop off the local recording.